You are 400 years old. Your body works perfectly. Your heart is steady. Your joints move. Your skin holds. And you have not spoken to anyone who remembers you from before in over a century because they are all dead. Every single one. You watched them go, and you are still here. Still perfectly, horribly here. This is what 1,000 years of life actually looks like. Here is the rule. Humans live for 1,000 years. That is the only change. Everything else, biology, psychology, physics, history, economics, stays exactly where it is. We are not adding magic. We are not adding happiness. We are adding time. And time, it turns out, is the one thing the human brain was never designed to survive. Let's start with something concrete, because the first thing people assume about living 1,000 years is that it would be wonderful. In 2023, researchers studying centenarians, people over 100, found that the ones who lived longest were not the ones with the best bodies. They were the ones with the strongest sense of purpose. And here is the problem. Purpose requires stakes. Stakes require the possibility of loss. Loss requires time running out. When time does not run out, purpose does not function the same way. A study from the University of California on long-term goal motivation found that people are significantly more productive and emotionally engaged when they believe a deadline is real. Remove the deadline entirely, and not just for years, but for centuries, and the human motivational system begins to break down at a structural level. You don't just get bored. You lose the architecture that makes meaning possible. And that is just the psychology. That is the easy part. What happens to your body, to your relationships, to your money, to your society, to the political systems that run your world? That is where it becomes genuinely dark. Let's go. Here is what a 1,000-year body actually looks like. Aging does not stop, it slows. In this scenario, the human lifespan extends to 1,000 years, which means the biological clock does not stop ticking, it simply runs 10 times slower. You hit physical maturity at roughly 25 to 30, same as now. Then the aging process stretches. So at 100, you are biologically equivalent to a current 10-year-old in aging terms. At 500, you are roughly where a 50-year-old is today. Which sounds fine. Until you think about what that means for the last centuries of your life. Because aging does not pause and then restart at the end. It accumulates. Slowly. Across everything. Your telomeres, the protective caps on your chromosomes that govern cellular aging, shorten with every cell division. In a 1,000-year body, you would expect to see profound systemic deterioration beginning somewhere around 800 years in, accelerating sharply after 900. Cancer rates would be extraordinary. The accumulated DNA damage across a millennium would mean that by the time you reached your final century, your body would be managing dozens of pre-cancerous conditions simultaneously. The immune system, already weakened by centuries of microbial exposure, would be working at a fraction of its original capacity. You would spend your last 100 years, a span of time longer than the entire recorded history of the United States, in a state of profound physical decline. And you cannot choose to leave early because that impulse, the philosophical acceptance of mortality, requires a brain that believes it will actually die. Which brings us to what happens to the mind. Forget the body for a moment. Think about memory. The human brain was not designed to hold 1,000 years of experience. It was not even designed particularly well to hold 100. Researchers studying autobiographical memory, the way we store our personal histories, have found that memories consolidate, compress, and selectively disappear over time. This is not a malfunction. It is a feature. The brain prunes what is not actively reinforced because holding everything would be computationally impossible. In a 1,000-year life, this process would become extreme. You would remember the last decade or two in reasonable detail. The centuries before that would be fragments, impressions, emotional residue without narrative. You would know that things happened. You would not remember them the way you remember yesterday. This creates a specific kind of psychological crisis that does not have a name yet, because no one has ever lived through it. The closest analogy researchers have is a condition called hyperthymesia, the inability to forget, which in its real-world cases causes significant psychological distress. People who remember everything describe it as exhausting, not magical. Now imagine the opposite, watching your own life dissolve into noise. Your first marriage, your first child's face, the place you grew up, gone. Not dead, dissolved, replaced by vague warmth and no details. At 400 years old, your relationships operate on a completely different timescale to everyone around you. The people you meet in their 20s will be dead before you reach 500. You learn this early. So do they. Every relationship you form after a certain age carries a specific weight, not of connection, but of anticipation of loss. Psychologists studying grief in hospice workers find that prolonged exposure to loss produces a distinct emotional flattening, a protective numbness that, over years, becomes permanent. Now stretch that exposure across centuries. At some point, most thousand-year humans would simply stop forming close bonds. Not because they chose to, because the brain, faced with enough loss, closes the door. Here is where it stops being a personal problem and becomes a civilizational one. Wealth accumulates over time. That is the simple mechanical fact that nobody talks about when they imagine a world of immortal humans. In the current world, inheritance transfers wealth between generations, which, however imperfectly, redistributes assets through family lines as people die. In a world where nobody dies for 1,000 years, wealth stays put. Compound interest on a significant investment portfolio, left untouched for 500 years, at even a modest annual return of 3%, produces a number that is difficult to comprehend. A starting investment of $1 million at 3% compounded annually for 500 years reaches approximately $2.3 trillion. That is not a thought experiment. That is arithmetic. Now consider that the earliest people born into the 1,000-year world, the first generation, begin accumulating in year 1. By year 300, the wealth gap between the oldest humans and the youngest is not a factor of 10 or a factor of 100. It is a factor that does not have a comfortable name. The job market collapses as a natural consequence. Senior positions do not open. Leadership does not turn over. The same people who were in charge in 200 CE are still in charge in 800 CE. Young people, meaning anyone under 200, are permanently junior in a world where seniority is measured in centuries. Innovation, which historically depends on new generations challenging old assumptions, slows to a crawl. Why would a 500-year-old executive change the system they have spent 300 years building? Housing, infrastructure, educational institutions, all of them lock up. Land owned in year 1 is still owned by the same family in year 700, because that family is still alive, sitting on it, not selling. The real estate market, in the current world, depends on death. So does inheritance law. So does most of what we understand as economic mobility. In a world of 1,000-year lives, those systems do not adapt gradually. They seize. And now the part that decides everything, political power in a world of immortal humans would not look like democracy. Democracy depends on the idea that power passes between people, between generations, between parties. It depends on the belief that no one person can hold power forever because no one lives forever. Remove that constraint, and the logic of democracy begins to unravel. History offers a precedent, not a perfect one, but an honest one. Hereditary monarchies, which held power through biological continuity rather than electoral succession, produced specific patterns of behavior: concentration of authority, suppression of challenge, long periods of stability, followed by catastrophic collapse when the system finally broke. The difference in a 1,000-year world is that the monarch does not pass power to a child. They hold it themselves. For centuries. Consider the rulers who existed in the current historical record. Figures like Augustus Caesar, who held effective control of Rome for over 40 years, or figures like Mao Zedong and Stalin, who held power for 3 and 4 decades respectively. The research on long-duration authoritarian rule is consistent. The longer a single individual holds unchallenged power, the more extreme and rigid their decision-making becomes. This is not a character flaw unique to those individuals. It is a documented psychological process called entrenchment bias. The longer a belief or system has been in place, the more psychologically costly it is to change it. A ruler who has held power for 300 years is not just politically entrenched, they are psychologically incapable of genuine reform. Their entire identity, their entire sense of meaning is built on the system they created. Threatening that system feels, neurologically, like a threat to survival. And they have had 300 years to eliminate anyone who might challenge them. In this world, the powerful do not just stay powerful, they become unchallengeable. And the tools they use to maintain that control, surveillance, debt, legal systems designed to prevent mobility, are not hypothetical. We already have them. In a 1,000-year world, they simply have centuries to perfect. What kind of civilization exists 200 years into a 1,000-year human lifespan? The answer depends almost entirely on which generation is in charge when the change happens. If the oldest humans, the ones who reach 1,000 first, were born in periods of conquest and consolidation, their values fossilize at civilizational scale. The Roman legions who sacked Carthage in 146 BC would still be alive in 854 AD. Not metaphorically, literally, still fighting, still governing, still defining what civilization means. Progress as we understand it, the idea that each generation builds on the last, corrects the errors of the last, discards what no longer works, requires the last generation to eventually leave. In a world where they do not leave, the correction mechanism breaks. Young humans, born into this world, live permanently in the shadow of the very old. Their ideas are not new to people who have heard 10,000 ideas across 5 centuries. Their revolutions are not surprising to people who have survived dozens. The world becomes profoundly conservative, not in any political sense, but in the deepest biological sense. Resistant to change because the people with the most power have the most to lose from it. Now, let's be honest about what we don't know. The biology here is extrapolation, not established fact. We do not have a 1,000-year human to study. What we do have is solid data on cellular aging, telomere degradation, DNA damage accumulation, and the psychological research on grief, motivation, and memory. And every one of those lines points in the same direction. Extended life without extended neurological and psychological capacity does not produce happiness. It produces endurance. The economics is arithmetic. Compound interest across 500 years produces the numbers stated. That part is not speculation. The politics is historical pattern recognition. Long-duration autocratic rule has consistent outcomes. Whether those outcomes scale to centuries is a reasonable inference from the evidence, not a certainty. Here is the reversal. Everyone assumes that living longer is what humans have always wanted. And it is, but only because the thing we actually want is not the years. It is the feeling that the years matter, and the years only matter because they end. Mortality is not the enemy of a meaningful life. It is the engine of it. Every study on end-of-life psychology shows the same thing. The people who describe their lives as most meaningful are not the ones who had the most time. They are the ones who felt the time was running out. Remove that feeling permanently. And not just for a year or a decade, but for a millennium. And you do not get more life. You get time that is structurally incapable of feeling like it matters. The 1,000-year human does not get to experience life more deeply. They experience it more thinly, spread across a canvas too large to see clearly, too vast to feel as a whole. We already know this, not from science fiction, from real life. Researchers studying retirement, the point at which the external structure of work, deadlines, and social obligation is removed, consistently find the same pattern. The first years are experienced as relief. Then, for a significant proportion of people, something else sets in. Aimlessness. Cognitive decline that tracks not with age, but with the removal of purpose. Depression rates among retired people who lack strong social networks are significantly higher than in working populations of the same age. The 1,000-year human is experiencing retirement at a civilizational scale. The deadline has been removed, and without it, the brain, built over hundreds of thousands of years to work towards something, begins to drift. We are already building the 1,000-year problem. We are just building it slowly. You are 400 years old. Your body works, your heart is steady, your joints move, your skin holds, and you would give everything, every one of the 600 years you have left, to feel, just once more, like they were running out. What if you could not die, but you could still be killed? Same impossible lifespan, but now everyone knows exactly what you have and exactly what they are willing to do to take it.